Story 1. Parents lied about a medical emergency to steal my $155,000 wedding fund to fund Golden Child's honeymoon. So I married in secret and bankrupted them. Hey, so I, 26F, recently got married to my husband, 26M. After a 6-year-long relationship, we had an intimate ceremony at his aunt's farmhouse property, which is not what we had in mind initially at all. I had actually wanted to get married on the beach because that's where some of our happiest memories are. My husband and I are both water babies and would make a trip to the beach at least once a month to unwind and let loose. So it's a special place for us. I had even started looking for hotels where we could all stay. Like literally any other bride on this planet, I wanted my wedding to be special, and I had even been saving money to have a huge celebration for the last 5 years. I work in advertising and I get paid decently, but my husband and I used to live modestly and tried our best to save money for the future. We had been planning to book one of the best hotels with a sea-facing view so our guests could really have a fantastic time, and it was meant to be a luxurious experience. But we had to change our plans and scale down considerably because my parents decided to borrow money from me a couple of months ago, and I couldn't bring myself to decline. Some context here. My brother, 24M, also got married a couple of months ago, but it had been sudden for him and they didn't plan much. He had been with his wife for about 2 years, and he had proposed to her just a month before they got married. It was a really small ceremony with just family and a few friends, but I was happy for him since it was their wedding, their choice. But a few weeks after the wedding, my mother reached out to me and asked to borrow $115,000. She told me that my father had fallen ill all of a sudden and said that it was probably his diabetes that was acting up again. But she couldn't bear all the medical expenses by herself and she needed me to help her. She told me that there was a special drug that the doctors had suggested, but it cost a lot of money since it had to be imported and she couldn't afford it because their insurance didn't cover this. I was really concerned for my father's health, so I decided to step up and lend her the money. No questions asked. I paid him a couple of visits and asked my mother to show me the medical reports several times, but she always managed to evade those questions. Whenever I would visit them, my dad was always in bed, but for some reason, he just didn't appear very sick. Even when I asked my mother why he hadn't been moved to the hospital so he could be observed and kept under professional care, she told me that it wasn't necessary at the moment. But somehow he was sick enough to need to be administered an uncommon drug that they didn't produce here and it wasn't even covered by their insurance? I'm not an idiot. After the first few visits, I had figured out that something very fishy was going on with my parents, but I didn't want to accuse them of anything before I was sure. It would be a really bad look for me if I accused them of lying to me about a medical emergency just to borrow money, and then it all turned out to be true after all. I realized that my brother hadn't been visiting our parents, and even when I would ask them why he wasn't there, my father would tell me that they didn't want him to worry because he was just so young and they wanted him to be focused on his work. And yet they were fine with me being worried sick about them? I did speak to my brother about it on a phone call after a couple of weeks had passed and he still hadn't visited our father. He told me that he would drop by as soon as he came back from his honeymoon. That was news to me because I had no idea that he had already left for his honeymoon because my parents hadn't told me. And neither he nor his wife had posted about this on their social media either. So I had no clue where he was. When I asked him why he hadn't told me, he said that he had been planning to surprise everybody by coming back after a month of being MIA with a bunch of photos, stories, and memories from their trip around Europe. He said that he had no intention of telling me either, but he had been quite concerned when I said that our father was sick, which is why he found it necessary to reply to me. He told me that he had spoken to our parents after he received my alarming text, but they had told him that he had nothing to worry about and they were doing just fine. He told me that our parents had probably just exaggerated the situation while talking to me, and I had believed it because I was kind of neurotic, which had led to a misunderstanding. I tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt by forcing myself to believe that maybe they had been hiding the truth from my brother because they didn't want to ruin his honeymoon or get him all worried about them. Because I knew what I had seen at my parents' house and there had been no scope for a misunderstanding. But then my brother mentioned to me that he would have felt really guilty about not being there for Dad if what I had said about him being very sick turned out to be true because apparently, our parents were the ones funding his insanely expensive and long honeymoon. All the warning bells started going off in my head, so I asked him exactly how much was this trip going to cost him. And then he told me that this trip was going to cost our parents at least $125,000 because he and his wife were pulling out all the stops and really making the most of their honeymoon by living in the most expensive hotels and eating at the best restaurants because they can only do this once. They would also be shopping for a lot of stuff, and even that was going to be covered by our parents. I knew instantly that this was where my money was going, and there was no medical emergency at all. There never had been any emergency to speak of, and that's why they had no documents to show me and had never even been at the hospital. My parents had just invented that whole story because they wanted the money to fund my brother's honeymoon, and that was supposed to be their wedding gift. I felt extremely betrayed while hearing my brother brag about how our parents were going above and beyond for him just so the two of them could enjoy their honeymoon since they hadn't been able to have a grand wedding. The money that I had lent to my parents was from my wedding fund, and I felt like I had been stabbed in the back when I realized that my parents had given it all away to my brother. When I confronted them after that phone call, my parents told me that they had to cook up some story because they knew that I wouldn't give them the money if I knew that this was going to be used by my brother for his honeymoon. They told me that he had been struggling at work and had been down in the dumps for a long time, so they wanted him to have some fun without having to worry about money. Unfortunately, they couldn't fund it themselves because that would endanger their own retirement fund, and so they had to borrow money from me. Their reasoning was that I was still young and earning and had a lot of years ahead of me where I could work and earn this money back, but it was not the same for them. They also said that it was just money and they would return it at some point, but for now, I just needed to put myself second and think about my brother's feelings because this honeymoon had apparently rejuvenated him and rescued him from getting depressed. I couldn't believe it because this meant that I would have to cut down on my wedding expenses for no reason. Just to be clear, I had been okay with the idea of having a smaller wedding as long as it meant that my father's health wouldn't suffer. But this was not something that I had signed up for. I was furious once they told me the truth, and I told them that they had to pay me back before I got married because I wanted to use this money for my wedding. I had a lot of expenses to think of if I wanted to go through with a beach wedding, and even though my husband and his family were covering some of the expenses, I had to look out for myself as well. My parents paying for the wedding had never been on the cards since they had told me very early on that they could either pay for me to go to college or they could pay for when I got married. But they couldn't afford both. I had decided that I was going to college and would pay for my wedding on my own, which is why I had been saving up for my wedding myself. In case any of you guys are wondering, when my brother started college, I did ask him if my parents had made him choose between these two as well, and he had laughed in my face as if this was the most ridiculous idea ever. I never brought that up with my parents because I didn't want to accuse them of having a favorite, even though it was very clear that they did have one. But I was young, and I still needed their help because I hadn't found a job at the time, so bringing these things up and fighting with them over it would only make the situation worse for me, and it didn't make sense to confront them about it. But it did come up several years later when I confronted them about the money that they had taken from me and how they had always favored my brother over me. They tried to deny it, but it was as clear as day, and I told them that they had to pay me back because I wasn't going to give up my dream wedding just because my brother was struggling at work. My parents could mollycoddle him by sending him off on an expensive vacation with their own money, but I hadn't worked super hard for 5 years and saved up for my wedding just so they could snatch that amount away from me and hand it to my brother. But they told me that they couldn't return the money to me in one go before the wedding, and it would take them a couple of years to give all of it back to me, and they actually expected me to be okay with it because apparently there was nothing more important than family. If I was ready to spend that money on a medical emergency for my father, then there was no reason why I couldn't spend that money to prevent my brother from slipping into depression. Here's the thing though, my brother was never going to get depressed because of work, and that's because he never took his job seriously, which is why he was bad at it and was earning so little. He works in sales and his income is almost all commission, so if he is bad at what he does, then he has nobody to blame but himself. And he might have been a little upset about that, but I can guarantee it to you guys that he was never going to get depressed. He just didn't care enough about anything because he had been spoiled by my parents all his life and just wasn't used to working hard for stuff, which is why he seemed upset about his job. That was all that it was, but my parents blew it out of proportion to make it seem like he was actually bothered by his failures at work and he had to be rescued. It was all a lot of baloney. And I tried to tell my parents that this wedding was really important to me. They already made a commitment to my husband and his family that I was going to cover certain expenses, which would become impossible if I didn't have the money, so they needed to do something. But they told me that there was no way that they could return the money to me before I got married, and I would just have to scale down or ask my husband and his family to help out. It got to a point where I actually found myself begging them to return my money to me, but all that they did was just shake their heads and tell me no and that they would return it eventually, but giving it back to me before the wedding wasn't possible. I left their house crying, and when I came back home and told my husband everything, he was just as furious and even more upset than me. He was about to contact a lawyer, but I told him that there would be no point because there was no written proof that my mother had wanted the money for medical reasons or had ever said that she was going to return it to me. It had all been informal, and there were no binding contracts or documents to prove a single thing, so even if we did file a lawsuit against her, it would just lead to more of our money being wasted by paying for the lawyer because we would probably not even be able to prove anything since we didn't even have texts in our favor. Everything had been verbal and off the record. So as much as we wanted to go after my parents, we decided not to because it would be pointless, and we didn't want to waste more of our money on a hopeless situation. Instead, we decided to start thinking about how we were going to change our wedding plans. Thankfully, my husband's family came to the rescue after they found out about what my parents had done, and his aunt offered to let us use her farmhouse venue for free. We had always been very keen on the idea of a beach wedding right from the beginning, so his aunt hadn't suggested it at first, but now that we were looking at other places, she made that suggestion, and I decided to check the place out. My husband had already seen the place before, but when I first walked into the venue, I just knew that this was it. It was a beautiful place, and even though it wasn't anywhere near the beach, my husband and I were content with it. His aunt was letting us use the venue for free, so it was all the more reason for us to go ahead and start planning around the farmhouse instead. I got busy with the wedding planning, and it gave me more of a reason to cut my parents off. I had already made up my mind that they were not going to be invited to my wedding, but I had been on the fence about my brother because he hadn't exactly done anything wrong since he didn't know that my parents had borrowed the money from me to give it to him. But he made the decision much easier for me by calling me up once he was back from his honeymoon and tearing into me about humiliating our parents by asking them to return my money. He told me that he had heard about whatever had happened from our mother, and he was very upset that I was being so difficult about this. Apparently, he believed that this was just no big deal, even though he was the one who spent my money, and said that as soon as he could, he would return it to me, but I just had to suck it up before the wedding and scale down. So that's when I made up my mind about him as well, and after that, I didn't speak to either of them. Now that I didn't have the entirety of my wedding fund, I couldn't spend money blindly and have a luxurious fancy wedding. Honestly, I think that worked for me because the wedding that I did have was a lot more beautiful than anything that I had in mind earlier. We had to scale down, but it was worth it because after a while we realized that this day was supposed to be about us. And in our daily lives, we were not the kind of people that we were trying to portray ourselves as. So it would be pretty shallow if we went out of our way to spend a bomb on a fancy wedding just to impress people. And we decided that we were going to cut down on the cost of the wedding and instead do something better with the money that we had saved afterward. In a way, I'm thankful for the way that things worked out because my wedding was still really beautiful and dreamy, but it had none of the pomp and show that I had in mind earlier. And it was really a good thing because we were only surrounded by the people who we loved and who loved us to celebrate our coming together. I think that's pretty much all you need for a wedding, so I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. And I posted the photos of my wedding a couple of days ago. Everyone from my family who had been invited to the wedding had been given very strict and specific instructions to make sure that my parents and my brother didn't get to know that the invitations had already been sent out because then they would throw a tantrum since they didn't get one. And that's how we managed to have a private ceremony without them showing up or trying to bully me into inviting them before the wedding. But now that that was over and everything had gone smoothly, I didn't see anything wrong about posting the photos on social media. However, they got to see it somehow and contacted me the very next day to demand an explanation as to why they had not been invited to my wedding. I thought that it was pretty surprising that they even expected to be invited because the last conversation that I had with any of them hadn't been a pleasant one. I had been crying when I left my parents' house after our last fight, and we hadn't spoken to each other since. And the last time that I spoke to my brother, he made me feel like this was all my fault and I was the one who was being dramatic. After that, I hadn't spoken to any of them, and they hadn't tried to talk to me either, so I didn't know why they had even expected to be invited. Not only had they expected that I was going to invite them, but they were upset that they were not present at the wedding. My parents were the ones who called me and then added my brother to the phone call so that all of them could yell at me at once. But I didn't care for it and I found it to be very entitled of them. I had already cut them out of my life, and I didn't need this drama while I was trying to enjoy my life as a newlywed. So I told them that after they had stolen money from me, I had to cut down on the cost of the wedding, so I decided only to invite family and a couple of close friends, and since they were neither, they didn't make the list. After that, I hung up and blocked them, hoping that they would leave me alone now. But an hour after that phone call, my husband told me that my brother had reached out to him so he could inform us that my parents had been really insulted by what I had said. My mother was devastated, so she kept crying and almost fainted because she was crying so hard. That's all that he said, but I started feeling guilty because I didn't mean to hurt my parents that badly. He might be bluffing, but I don't know for sure, and it's making me feel weirdly bad ever since. AITA for not inviting my parents and my brother to my wedding because they stole money from my wedding fund? Date 1. Hi, so it's been a week since I had that last conversation with my parents and my brother, and I have decided that I am not going to speak to them again. My mother can cry as much as she wants to, but it's not going to change the facts. I had been crying really hard the day that I had confronted them about the money and had even begged them to return it to me before the wedding, but they didn't seem to care about that. They had taken it really lightly, and so now I was going to do the same to them. You reap what you sow. I also told my brother never to contact me or my husband, especially my husband, because he had nothing to do with any of this, and I didn't want my family to bother him with their petty antics. And then had blocked him again after that text because I didn't want my family to have any access to me. They had treated me badly all my life, but now I was not going to take that anymore. I swear if I had a way, then I would even file a lawsuit against them and get my money back. But that might be a bit of a long shot right now since we don't have any tangible evidence. My husband thinks that it is worth a try and it might just work, so we've been considering it. He has been in talks with a reputed lawyer, and in a couple of days we are going to make a decision about what to do. Until then, I just have to think of a way to make them confess or admit to the fact that they had borrowed the money from me under the pretext of using it for a medical emergency, but then they had given it away to my brother so he could have a fun honeymoon. It's going to be difficult to prove it in court, but I don't want to let them off the hook so easily. I deserve to get my money back, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that they return it to me, and they return it to me soon enough. Update 2. Yesterday I told my brother not to bother my husband with our family drama, so he obviously took it as a sign to drag him into this even though it doesn't involve him. After we got back from work, my husband told me that my parents and my brother had sent him a bunch of texts and demanded that he speak to me and tell me to unblock them. When he blocked them, they decided to take it a level higher and actually showed up at his workplace. Apparently, they had been waiting for him right outside, and as soon as they saw his car leaving the place, they started tailing him and honking at him repeatedly. So he had to pull over and wait for them to catch up because he could recognize my brother's car and knew that it was them. He also knew that if he didn't stop and wait for them, then they would just follow him home, and that would really bother me. So he decided to take one for the team and entertain their BS. When he pulled over, my brother left his car, walked up to his window, and said that they wanted to speak to him in person. There was a diner nearby, and my husband just wanted to get it over with. They took a booth in the diner so my family could say whatever it was that they believed was so important. My brother told him that he believed that it wasn't fair for me to cut everyone off over some money and thought that it was a bit of an overreaction. They also thought that my implying that we were not family anymore just because they had borrowed money from me was taking things too far. I had already blocked them so they couldn't reach out to me, but they knew that if my husband tried to speak to me, then I might just hear him out. So they were trying to appeal to him, and then my husband could remind me that we were a family no matter what, so I needed to act like it instead of throwing tantrums over every little misunderstanding and acting like a brat. My parents also said that they were going to return the money to me eventually, but it was just not possible for them to give it back to me all at once, and they had already explained it to me like a million times. So I needed to be more thoughtful because my brother was struggling at work and my parents were about to retire in a couple of years. They were trying to convince my husband that this was all my fault and I was acting out for no reason, but my husband played it really well, and instead of putting them in their place, he actually entertained it and made them feel like he was on their side. He told them that he could try and explain this to me, but it would help a lot more if they reached out to me personally as well and sent a heartfelt message to me. So far, they had only been taking an accusatory tone with me, but my husband convinced them that if they acknowledged their mistakes, then that might calm me down. And those idiots actually bought it. My husband manipulated them into sending me a message where they acknowledged what they had done and made them believe that might make me go easy on them, and I would end up apologizing to them because the tone was everything. It's all a lot of baloney, of course, because as soon as they send that message, we are using that as an admission of guilt and going after them legally. I am actually really proud of my husband because he dealt with this much better than I would have, and I think he's an evil genius. But he's my evil genius, so I love him. Update 3. Well, my husband's plan worked, and we are so pumped right now. My parents and my brother, like a bunch of idiots, sent me an email detailing every single lie that they had told and confessing to whatever they had done. So now that we have proof, my husband has given our lawyer the green light to go ahead with a petition, and soon enough we will be getting our money back. $115,000 might not be a lot to a lot of people, but to me it means a lot because I spent the last 5 years trying to save up for the future, and I worked really hard to get where I am today. It took a lot of late nights and sacrifices, and I'm not about to let it all go in vain just because my brother is lazy and my parents want to enable him. So we will be suing them, and no matter what it takes, we will absolutely be getting my money back. We have also started planning for our honeymoon, and it's going to be a short trip to the beach again because that's where this all started, and it's always going to be a special place for us. We might take a longer break in a couple of months and make an actual vacation out of it, but until then, this is going to have to be done. We realize that we don't have to impress people and spend a ton of money. We can just do whatever makes us happy, and so we are doing exactly that. Also, because I don't want to be like my brother who posted a bunch of photos from his honeymoon after they returned to rub it in people's faces, but now he is going to be sued just for that. It's really sad for them, but they brought it on to themselves, and now they totally deserve whatever is going to come to them. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. My girlfriend was having sexual relations with another guy while we were dating. I consider it cheating, but she says it's not. Am I exaggerating? Is this a red flag? My girlfriend Maria and I have been in a relationship for almost a year. Everything has pretty much gone okay. We get along very well and are both very happy being together. While it was my first relationship, it wasn't hers, but this has not caused any kind of problem from either side. We have been open to talking about this right from the start, and both had nothing to say about it, as it should be. Days ago, on an evening walk after dinner together, we bumped into a guy who knew Maria. She introduced us. His name is Joe. They talked for a little bit, and then we went on with our night. While walking, I asked Maria who that guy was, and she told me they met in college last year because they were together in a couple of classes and that they had been friends with benefits for a while. I would lie if I said I didn't feel nervous about that. As I said, I never cared about how many guys she had slept with before meeting me, and I wouldn't have cared if some of them were friends with benefits or one-night stands. And even though I never said it explicitly, I have never made negative remarks about people we know being in those kinds of relationships. But the fact she hid that fact from me made me a bit unsettled. Yet, I tried to understand her perspective of maybe being embarrassed of telling me that and tried to appreciate her honesty. But that thought didn't leave my mind for the rest of the night, and while thinking about it, I noticed that there was something odd. Maria and I dated for a pretty long time before becoming officially a couple. We started dating in January 2023. We had our first kiss only after 2 months of dating, around the end of March, and had sexual relations only around 1 month after that, May. Our anniversary would be on April 20th, the first time we went on a date with our friends as a couple. Now, it also happens that Maria started classes in January 2023. This means that she had met Joe around that time, and that they must have been having sexual relations in the subsequent weeks. I didn't know exactly for how long they were friends with benefits, but everything seemed to overlap a bit too much. So I asked her for clarification, and she told me that she was having sexual relations with him while also dating me, and that she stopped around April 2023 when she was sure that it was becoming serious with me. I freaked out. I said that she was a cheater, not only for doing this but also for keeping it a secret for all this time. She was strangely calm and was adamantly sure that what she did wasn't cheating because we were still dating, and as if it was a trial, and I should have appreciated that she stopped everything abruptly with Joe because she cared about me. I don't know how to feel. Am I exaggerating? Now on to the next story. Story 3. I'm a 28-year-old guy who used to be thick as thieves with my older brother. He's 30. We were the dynamic duo, inseparable through thick and thin. But then, plot twist. He gets hitched to his now wife, she's 29, about 5 years ago, and boom, it's like he vanished into thin air. It's not just me feeling the cold shoulder. He's pretty much ghosted our entire family post-marriage. Here's where it gets wild. He's swapped out family traditions for his in-laws. Birthdays? Those are exclusively with his wife's family now. We get the leftovers, a belated celebration if we're lucky. It's like we're the second choice and afterthought. What gives? Has anyone else experienced their sibling turning into a family Houdini once they tied the knot? And get this, every single holiday, like clockwork, he's over at his in-laws, and we're just left wondering what happened. My folks and I couldn't help but feel a bit abandoned. It's like he's just erased us from his priority list. We tried to shrug it off, but deep down, it stung. The kicker? His in-laws aren't exactly our biggest fans, so crashing their festive get-togethers wasn't an option. But here's where the plot thickens. I recently popped the question to my girlfriend of 7 years. She's 26. Plot twist of the century, right? As we're riding the high of getting engaged, we discover she's 4 weeks pregnant. Over the moon doesn't even start to cover it. So we decide to throw a mega bash to celebrate the double whammy of joy. The upcoming wedding and our little bundle of joy on the way. I even extended an olive branch to my brother and sister-in-law, hoping for a family reunion of sorts. But get this, during the entire party they're acting all kinds of weird, like they're huddled in a corner, whispering like they're plotting a heist or something, and barely interact with anyone else. Total vibe killers. After a while, they finally approached me and asked me if they could speak to me in person. They dragged me aside to my bedroom and locked the door. I was very confused since I didn't know what could be so important and personal that they needed to do all of this just to make sure we weren't overheard. Then they started talking, and my sister-in-law told me that they'd been trying for a baby as well for quite a while now, and my sister-in-law was also pregnant. I congratulated them, but they didn't look very happy and went on to tell me that they'd been struggling, and so they ended up spending a lot of money on IVF and medical bills, which meant that once the baby came along, they'd be in a lot of financial trouble. My sister-in-law had asked her parents and siblings for help, but they'd refused, saying that they needed to save up for themselves. So they suggested that we team up and ask my parents for money since they could definitely afford that. My dad's a retired heart surgeon, and my mom was a journalist, so they made a pretty comfortable living. They have saved up a significant amount over the years, so yes, they can afford to help us out. But I like to believe that they've raised us to be responsible enough to earn and spend our money in a way that doesn't require us to ask for help in the first place. And the way that my brother wanted to get the money was even worse than what I thought. They were too proud to just go and ask for the money, so they'd wanted me to ask on their behalf and claim that I was the one struggling. My brother had constantly snapped off family for the past 2 years after his marriage, so he knew that if he asked, it would be really awkward and humiliating for him, which is why he wanted to avoid it and was sending me ahead. My brother, out of the blue, hits me with this scheme where he wants me to hit up our parents for double the cash they actually need, just so we can split the loot. He's banking on the fact that our folks would never leave me high and dry if they thought I was in a jam. And the kicker? Even if our parents didn't cough up the full amount, we'd still get a chunk of change, and that's enough for them. Talk about a wild plan, right? I was shocked that they were even suggesting this because our parents had always treated both of us equally, even though my brother had pretty much stopped speaking to us after his marriage. So to try and dupe them into paying such a huge amount of money was just so low and disgusting that I couldn't even bring myself to respond to what they were suggesting for a good few seconds. My brother, who'd always been a good son, was now suddenly trying to cover up his own faults and was even willing to lie so that his ego wouldn't suffer a blow. After a few minutes, I told him straight away that I wasn't going to be part of that disgusting attempt at fooling our parents, and no way in hell was I being the scapegoat for something as stupid as this. Not just that, I also went on to tell my brother that I'd been considering making him a partner in the new business that I was starting. But after what he just suggested, that was never going to happen. I've been planning to start my own shipping business since I have experience in that particular industry. So here's the deal. I was toying with the idea of launching something big right after we got engaged, but then the baby news hit and I hit pause, swimming in second guesses. But my fiancée, this powerhouse of a woman who's all in on her career too, wasn't having any of my hesitations. She gave me that nudge, saying, "Go for it," assuring me the money situation was under control. And with a little one on the horizon, it felt like the universe was giving us a wink and a nod. It was like all signs were pointing to now or never. I already had some investors, and my dad was also lending us some seed money, so we were all sorted. And by the time the baby was born, we'd be well established. I'd been planning to ask my brother since he was a business major and had good grades in college. Also, he didn't seem to be happy with his current job because of the salary, and he felt that he deserved more, which I could do for him. But then, after what he and his wife suggested, I had no intention of making him a part of my business or my life. My brother was stunned when he realized what I said and that his own suggestion had just cost him a business opportunity. He immediately attempted to take it all back, saying that he was just joking and he didn't actually mean any of it, but I knew the truth. I told him that they could stay for the duration of the party because it was a happy occasion and I didn't want to ruin the vibe, but after that, we were done. I didn't want to speak to them or hear from them ever again, and my decision was final. Then I got up and left and didn't even look back, even when they requested me to rethink my decision. So the engagement party is in full swing, and my brother and his wife are acting all kinds of shady, whispering and trying to drag me into corners for secret chats. Seriously, it was like they were plotting some heist right in the middle of our celebration. Everyone else is oblivious, having a blast, but I'm there wondering what kind of drama is about to unfold. The party wraps up, and it's just me and my fiancé. I spill the beans on the whole weirdness, how my brother and sister-in-law kept trying to scheme with me. Her jaw hits the floor when she hears their audacious plan. She's just as shocked as I am and totally backs me up on my decision to shut that down fast and go no contact with them. Can you believe that? Right at our engagement party. What a night. Huh? But that's not where it ended, because the very next day, my brother dropped by again and asked me to help him out. He said that I owed this to him because of all that he's done for me my entire life. I was confused because he'd never really done anything for me, at least financially, so I asked him what he meant by that. He told me that back in college, he'd agreed to not attend his first choice since our parents had said that that one was way too expensive, and they wouldn't be able to afford the best colleges for both of us. So apparently he had to compromise and ended up going to college closer to home, in spite of being accepted to the one he actually wanted to go to, just so that I could attend the college of my choice. When he told me that, I felt really awful and guilty, which was probably what my brother wanted in the first place. Anyway, he told me that I could either agree to the plan that he and sister-in-law have come up with, or I could make him a partner like I'd intended to earlier, and give me 3 days to think about it. I'm on the second day now, and the guilt is eating away at me. Honestly, I didn't even know that my brother had made such a huge sacrifice for me. But then his so-called plan is incredibly cruel, and I absolutely do not want to go through with it. Our parents have always been kind to us, and I don't want to be the kind of person who tricks and lies to their own parents just for the sake of money. And about the business, I'm at a crossroads here, folks. Despite my brother's knack for business, his current antics are throwing major red flags my way, and with a little one joining the scene soon, I'm not in the mood to gamble. My fiancé and I have been racking our brains trying to figure out the best move in this chess game of family drama and business decisions. It boils down to this. Do I extend a helping hand despite his manipulative guilt trip about college sacrifices, or do I stand my ground? The thought of turning my back on him doesn't exactly leave me with a warm and fuzzy feeling. But then again, his behavior has been anything but brotherly. Fast forward to 3 days after pouring my heart out here, and guess who decides to show up? My brother, dialing in for a verdict. Talk about timing, right? I told him that I needed some more time to think about it, and while he did sound annoyed about it, he did agree to it. But I didn't need time to think. I just wanted to speak to my parents about what he told me. I couldn't just shake off the feeling that my brother wasn't being entirely truthful with me, so I decided to visit my parents and ask them about the whole college thing that my brother had told me about. And they just confirmed my suspicions. He had indeed been lying about sacrificing his college of choice for my sake. They told me that he hadn't even been accepted into that college in the first place, and my brother had demanded that they help him bribe his way somehow into being accepted. When they declined, he got upset and started accusing them of favoring me over him, and they got into a huge fight about this whole thing. And I think that's when they started growing apart. Then in college, he met his wife, and that made matters even worse and effectively put an end to any hope of reconciliation because my sister-in-law was only interested in adding fuel to the fire. Turns out my brother had been playing the victim card, painting himself as the less-loved son, convincing my sister-in-law that my family and I were just waiting to leech off him. Her background? She comes from a family that runs a restaurant and doesn't shy away from flaunting their wealth, so her being hyper-focused on their financial well-being didn't exactly come out of left field. But here's the kicker. She was dead set against my brother pitching in financially for his own flesh and blood. Yeah, you read that right. She maneuvered to keep my brother on a tight leash, far from our reach. Discovering this was a wake-up call, and boy, was I relieved I hadn't caved to my brother's outrageous requests. It hit me that he'd been weaving tales and playing me for a fool the entire time. My blood boiled at the thought that he believed he could pull one over on me without a second thought. I cut him off, blocking him across all social media and communication channels. Enough was enough. I also told my parents about the plan that my brother and his wife had come up with and warned them to not lend him any money. What's really disappointing is that my parents told me that they wouldn't have had any issue with lending my brother the money had he just asked for it. But he just had to come up with some elaborate plan to deceive them and make things worse for himself. It's been 2 days since I learned the truth, and when my brother couldn't get through to me, he made my sister-in-law contact me instead. But I've blocked her as well, so now they've started bothering my fiancée. She's not very bothered about any of this, though, and has been treating the situation as a joke. I'm glad she can take this thing lightly and make it funny because I'm just too pissed off about what they've been trying to do. I was really hoping they'd take the hint, feel a bit of guilt, and keep their distance, but if they dared to cross our doorstep again, I was ready to let them have it. Update 2. Guess what? My brother and his wife, clearly missing a sensitivity chip, decided to drop by our place this morning. Yep, they just showed up, mood sour enough to spoil our entire day. Despite my fiancé making it crystal clear we weren't up for chatting, my brother bulldozed his way into our home. That set me off big time. This is our space, and him stomping in like he owned the place was the last straw. I didn't mince words, and told him straight up he wouldn't see a dime from us. His track record of being deceitful and self-centered, with zero respect for us, was all the proof I needed that helping him was off the table. He seemed a little taken aback by my outburst and asked me what I was talking about. So I told him that I'd already talked to Mom and Dad, and I knew that he'd made that whole college thing up just to make me feel guilty and manipulate me into giving him either the money or the position. Even after that, he and his wife had the audacity to continue arguing with me. Their defense was that, in a way, the only reason my brother wasn't able to attend the college of his choice was because my parents wouldn't resort to unfair means and buy his way in, and eventually that money that they refused to spend on him went into my education. So he wasn't really lying. I couldn't believe that this was their argument. It was almost laughable, though, how hard they were trying to make it sound like our parents had been unfair to him or whatever. I'd been accepted into the college of my choice fair and square, and I even had a scholarship, so technically our parents had to spend less on my education than on his. Moreover, they were the ones who never gave our parents the love and respect that they deserved and were now even trying to dupe them, which was just so sickening. If my brother and his wife had been decent folks who didn't choose to alienate my parents over trivial matters, they wouldn't have found themselves in this mess to begin with. I relayed to my brother what our dad had told me during our last conversation. He would have still lent him the money if he'd just set aside his misplaced pride and asked properly. For a moment there, my brother actually seemed somewhat remorseful. However, his wife was quick to dispute, insisting that there's no way our dad would have helped after all these years, suggesting he only said that to paint them in a bad light. Honestly, that was a ludicrous accusation. We didn't have to lift a finger to make them look bad. They were doing a fine job of that all on their own. They just were. My brother and his wife couldn't just forget about their massively inflated egos for once and ask our parents for help, and that was somehow supposed to be everyone's fault but their own. After a while, I got tired of arguing with them since I realized that there was no point in trying to explain why they were so wrong here, so I asked them to leave and stop bothering us. My brother got mad when I said that and called me a selfish brat and a lot of other things as well, which was really hurtful because, as I said, we'd grown up as the best of friends. I don't know how he got so lost along the way, but now he feels like I don't know him at all. He left after a lot of screaming and fighting, and it's been a few hours since that happened. so I've managed to calm myself down considerably. But obviously, I still feel awful about what happened. I can't see a way out of this which doesn't end with me and my brother never speaking to each other ever again. In all probability, my parents are also going to cut him off for good now because of his utter lack of morals and ethics. My fiancée has been wonderful and is trying her very best to distract me from all that's going on right now, and I'm just so grateful for that. I think that in a while, I'm going to call my parents up and tell them about what my brother said. It'll hurt them, that's for sure, but they have every right to know what kind of person he is. Update 3. So I contacted my parents half an hour ago and told them whatever had happened in the morning. They weren't surprised in the least and were mostly disappointed with his behavior. I could hear my mom crying in the background while my dad tried to comfort her, and my heart broke for them because my mom blamed herself for how he turned out. I don't think they could have done anything better to avoid this, though, and this is completely on my brother himself. We grew up in the same house with the same rules and were treated just the same, and I turned out fine. I don't know what happened to him. My dad wasn't very kind about the whole fiasco though and sounded very angry on the phone while I told him the things that my sister-in-law had said while my brother just went along with it. He told me that he knew what to do now and was muttering something about this being the last straw for him. But when I asked, he told me not to think about it and focus on my work and family instead. I guess I'll take his advice and do just that and try to stay away from any more of my brother's unnecessary drama. Update 4. Hey guys! It's been 4 days since the last update, and today my brother came by once more. This time he wasn't as aggressive and was on his own with no sister-in-law in tow. After the last meeting we had, I was kind of wary of him to say the least, but he seemed a lot more rational this time, so I was still willing to speak to him. He informed me that Dad's lawyer had called him up a day ago to tell him that he wouldn't be inheriting anything apart from a couple of antique watches that my dad had bought when he was younger. So basically, no money for my brother in case my dad passed away. And I know he was trying not to show it on his face, but he was definitely scared out of his wits. He told me that he needed my help to make it up to Dad and beg for forgiveness so that he would undo this decision. I was kind of hesitant because I didn't even know what I was supposed to do in a situation like this. I did feel bad for him, but then again, all of this was his own fault. He wanted me to accompany him to our parents' house and side with him so that Dad wasn't as hard on him. I highly doubt that my presence will make any difference since I'm the one who told Dad about all this drama in the first place, but just because he seemed so desperate, I agreed to this and went with him. As soon as our father saw him in the doorway, his face lost all traces of kindness, and he told my brother to get the hell out that very instant. He didn't even give him a chance to argue or explain himself and completely humiliated him before he'd even set foot in the house. It was only after my mother and I requested him to at least wait until we were inside the house that he let him in, still looking mad. My brother wasted no time in beginning to apologize for whatever he'd said to me about them and said that his head had been turned by his wife. I thought it was particularly low to blame it all on his wife when they were both equally at fault. His wife had obviously forced him to abandon his own family, but it was eventually his choice to do so. And when her family turned their backs on them, they came crawling back to us. Even then, they didn't have the common courtesy to at least apologize for the way he'd been so distant with us, constantly choosing her family over his own. If anything, he was worse than his wife because at least she'd stuck with her family. Anyway, my mother seemed to melt a little at his apology, but my dad was not that soft. He told him straight away that if money was what he needed, then he'd have to work for it. He couldn't lie and cheat his way to get what he wanted. He had the chance to just ask for it, but he'd blown it way back, so now he had no other option but to work for what he wanted. I didn't know where he was going with this, but then my dad told him that the only way he'd be able to do that was to work under me once I started my own business. At first, he was totally against it and wanted to be made an equal partner, but like I said initially, I've almost no trust in him, so that was out of the question. I wouldn't even be willing to hire him unless my dad hadn't come up with that solution, but just to honor my parents, I agreed to offer him a job. I was the one supposed to keep an eye on him and make sure he was doing his work honestly and sincerely. Any funny business at all, and he'd not only lose his job, but also his entire inheritance. This is what my father came up with, and honestly, he's getting off pretty easy because he's getting a second chance at redeeming himself as a human being, which is honestly pretty rare. He's definitely not very happy about it, that's for sure. I can't blame him either. Having to work for your little brother isn't probably the ideal situation for anyone. But if he wants the money, then he will have to work for it fair and square. Dad's also agreed to send him some money for the time being to take care of his needs at the moment, which is also really kind of him after whatever has happened. I hope that my brother takes this chance and this job seriously and doesn't waste it. Now on to the next story. Story 4. I decided to sell my PS5 rather than sharing it with my stepbrothers. And things took a turn for the worse. My 15M mom and dad met and briefly dated while they were both studying at uni. My mom gave birth to me after they had broken up and had to sue my dad for child support. I was raised by my mom and had virtually nothing to do with my dad throughout my childhood. My mom was an international student, and her family cut ties with her due to the circumstances of my birth. Tragically, 2 years ago, I lost my mom to cancer, and then I was placed under the care of my dad. My dad has remarried and has 2 sons, 5 and 7, with his wife. It wasn't a bad arrangement at first, but we were all essentially strangers. I was given a bedroom to myself and we shared some meals, but other than that, I kept to myself. About 10 months ago, I was lucky enough to score a casual job at an aged care facility as IT support. It was stupid easy money as it involved installing and maintaining a dozen or so common PCs used by the residents, plus running basic computing workshops. I ended up accruing a whole lot of disposable income in a short time. Stupidly, instead of just keeping quiet about it, I decked out my room with a new TV, headphones, and a PS5. Obviously, this setup was of great interest to my 2 stepbrothers. Initially, my rule was that they could play the PS5 anytime I wasn't using it, but I would get first dibs if I wanted to play or use my TV. I was also super accommodating by buying an extra controller, which I didn't need, and several kid-friendly games that they wanted to play. I eventually had to change the rule to only play when I was there because the 5-year-old destroyed one of my controllers by spilling juice on it. This is where the drama started. They whined to my parents, who then ordered me to place the PS5 in the living room. I refused, stating that I had purchased it with my own money. This led to their argument that I have too much money and should contribute rent, utilities, and food money. I called their bluff and said, "Sure, draw up a contract, and I'll get a lawyer to review it to ensure it complies with the Family Law Act." My dad then told the boys that he was going to buy a separate PS5 for the boys for Christmas, but the dude is clueless about the global shortage. Finally, last night, after realizing that he had zero chance of buying one for close to RRP, my dad threatened me to either voluntarily gift my PS5 to the boys for Christmas or he would toss it in the bin while I was at school. I was so pissed that I went on Facebook Marketplace and sold the PS5. The boys found out today and were devastated. I feel really bad because they shouldn't be punished for this F-up show. My parents are in their room talking about me, and I'm sitting here in my room. I don't know how I could have handled this better. Update 1. Wow, this blew up overnight. Firstly, thanks to all the kind strangers out there giving me your positive encouragement and support. It's quite humbling that so many have taken the time to read my story and chose to provide positive support. Some people were after an update on the situation. I'm at work now, but my stepmom had a chat with me this morning, and it was quite positive. She said she didn't know about my existence until right before I came to live with them, and so it caused a huge rift between her and Dad. She apologized for projecting that onto me and not being more welcoming. She also didn't know about my dad's threats and told me that it won't happen on her watch. My half-brothers also admitted to her about the juice incident. She said that she is going to get the boys a Switch for Christmas, and she offered to pay me the difference between RRP and getting a new PS5. I probably won't take the money, but at least it's a step forward. This was the longest conversation I have ever had with her. By the way, no comms from my dad yet. To answer some common questions. 1. My bank account is entirely in my name only, Australia. No one else has the ability to view or access the balance. I actually don't think my dad's demand for rent was about money. They both earn a good salary. He's just butthurt that I'm not relying on his money. 2. Yes, I really am 15. I typed out my post in Word and so that it could be spell and grammar checked. Maybe that's what confused people. 3. I get $27.50 Australian an hour on a casual contract with additional loading for weekends. Plus, The operations manager at the aged care facility is super chill and allows me to schedule my hours around school. I just have a cap that I can't go over. She lets me do my homework on the clock, and I get free meals from the cafeteria. If I help the residents on non-facility devices, they usually tip me in cash or sometimes cookies. Lol. I've got a fair bit saved up because I don't really have any expenses. I've got a shoebox of documents from when my mom passed. I think my mom's assets are looked after by a trustee firm, which will be turned over to me at 18. The law firm managing the will had previously explained this to me, but I wasn't really paying attention at the time. I've got to still go through everything. 5. I sold the PS5 for a tidy profit even with the cost of the damaged controller. I'm not desperate for one ATM, so I'll just sign up for a waiting list again, so I won't need to take up my stepmom's offer. This is probably my last post on this issue. Thanks again for the love, everyone. Update 2. So we've got a gathering with the extended family today. This is the first time I've met any of them due to COVID, and they've all been super lovely to me. My stepmom showed them my original post, and they are all getting stuck into Dad. My uncle, Dad's younger brother, has set up a Reddit account for him, and he's doubling down as he thinks Redditors will take his side when they read his account of it. I'm not going to link or read his post, but people have been telling me it's quite a bloodbath. Here is where it gets fun. The dad did his own Am I the A-hole post. Here it is. Am I the a-hole for asking my son to share his console with his brothers instead of keeping it in his room? A few days ago, my bio son Jonah, not his real name, posted a biased and frankly defamatory post about an incident in my home regarding a PS5. My wife was kind enough to share the post and comments with our entire extended family at our Christmas gathering. So apparently now I'm a huge a-hole. My brother suggested that I post here to set the record straight and give people both sides of the issue. Firstly, I never actually intended to charge Jonah rent. His job gives him essentially 100% disposable income purely because he lives in our household. He used this money to deck out his room, buy brand shoes, buy the latest iPhone, etc., all for himself. I couldn't care less about how he spends his money, but it does set a poor example for my other two boys. The last straw was when Jonah set a login password for the PS5. I basically told him that if he's not willing to share, then why should I give him a free ride? My son should be grateful. While we shared DNA, I only dated his mom, May, not her actual name, for all of 5 months back in uni. I was very clear with May that I didn't want kids, but apparently, consent doesn't go both ways. May put me through legal hell and ended up costing me tens of thousands of dollars over the years in child support, setting my own goals back. Instead of letting Jonah end up in a group home, I stepped up and took him in when May got sick. Instead of gratitude, I constantly have to deal with disrespect and attitude. Because of Jonah, my wife thinks I breached her trust, all for something that happened well before I met her. While the boys previously did have access to the PS5, he now won't let them play it now that school is finished for the year unless he's home, which he never is. I gave him the ultimatum of either sharing the console or no one gets to play it. In response, he pulled the most passive-aggressive move ever and sold it so now no one plays it. So listen, how am I the a-hole here? I've taken in this kid into my home, a kid who, by the way, will receive a sizable inheritance in a few years thanks to May's estate. I've given him a home, a family, and funded his lifestyle, all at the cost of my own relationship. In return, I haven't asked for a cent, and he won't treat me with respect nor follow my rules. But somehow I'm the giant a-hole who's in the study typing this out instead of enjoying Christmas with my extended family. Instead of attacking me, I'm hoping people will now give their fair opinion of the situation based on seeing both sides of the story. He also provided a heated update in the comments. Okay, clearly this hasn't gone down the direction I thought it would. Clearly, some of you have issues with comprehension or just can't be bothered reading my comments fully. I want to be clear. I never threatened to collect rent from Jonah. I don't need his part-time work money or about his inheritance money. I make a very good salary, probably more than the vast majority of people who use Reddit. I simply tried to explain to him that he has all this disposable income because he doesn't have to worry about basic needs. I didn't explain it properly at the time because we were arguing, But my intention wasn't for Jonah to give his PS5 to the kids permanently. I just wanted it kept in the common area until I can buy another one for the kids. Jonah never told me about the controller. If he had, of course I would have replaced it. That's not an issue. I expected him to not be so selfish to his brothers. Keeping it in his room under password protection is so rude. Jonah gets home really late most days, so my kids are in bed by the time he gets back. I won't debate the nuances about sex and custody. I'm not an idiot. I understand perfect consent and parental responsibilities. I will just say that there is a large gap between consenting to sex versus consenting to having a child. I get that our current laws are against me on this one. I didn't intend to lie to my wife. Jonah and May were something way into the distant past for me. Our settlement agreement was very clear on that. I had absolutely zero communication with May or Jonah for at least the 10 years prior to finding out about her illness. My child support was at a fixed rate, so I had actually paid her out a lump sum that was supposed to take care of him until 18. It wasn't like it was getting taken out of pay every week. As far as I knew, I was never supposed to hear from Jonah or May ever again. Why would I tell my wife about something like that? Now the dad made another post stating, "Am I the a-hole for intercepting and eating my son's food delivery while he was grounded? My eldest son, 16, is undergoing a hormonal-fueled rebellious phase. His behavior consists of things like rolling his eyes when I talk, backchat when I tell him to do something, overemphasizing putting on his headphones when I enter the room, and a whole laundry list of other passive-aggressive behaviors. It was his birthday yesterday, and he was going to go out with his friends this weekend to celebrate by paintballing. However, when I got home from work yesterday, I noticed that he had failed to do some chores I had set him and then did the whole headphones routine when I started telling him off for it. I got so sick of his attitude that I threatened to ground him for 2 weeks, which means not letting him leave the house except for work. My words clearly cut through his headphones, and it dawned on him that he would not be allowed to go paintballing this weekend. So he took off his headphones and said, "Go F yourself," and then shut himself in his room. This naturally led to his actual grounding. The grounding didn't seem to faze him as he spends a lot of time in his room anyway. I cut off his devices from our home Wi-Fi, but he works around this by having his own hotspot. He refused to come out for dinner last night when my wife asked him to and is basically barricaded himself in his room. At 10 p.m. last night, he ordered himself a meal via a delivery app. Again, he has clearly been passive-aggressive here, flaunting his independence as he has a perfectly lovely meal in the fridge made by my wife. I was still up watching TV, so intercepted the delivery and ate the meal myself. At some point, my son must have come out and seen me but retreated back to his room without saying anything. My wife thinks I am a major a-hole for eating the meal, but I think it comes part and parcel with the grounding. My wife also thinks I'm too harsh. I've said I'll let him go to paintball if he apologizes. So am I the a-hole here? This post, in turn, fueled an update from the Sun. Hi everyone. Sorry for hijacking the top comment. This is my dad's post. Thanks for everyone's support. I don't think I need to add any more fuel to the fire here. The post and the comments largely speak for themselves. I just wanted to give a quick update to everyone that I'm 100% fine and okay. My stepmom vetoed my punishment, so I'm all good to go out with my friends this weekend. One of my new uncles has asked me to stay with them for a while, which is also super cool, so I'm doing well and loving life. These comments are hilarious. Much love. New update from the father. I'm sure many of you would be ecstatic to know that my marriage may be over. I came home this evening to find that my wife and my 2 younger boys have left, probably at her mother's house. My oldest is still staying at my brother's house since the beginning of Jan. This has hit me hard. As Redditors now like to remind me on a daily basis, I now know I've been a shitty husband and father. I have some self-reflection to do. I am stubborn, but my wife has always been there to talk me down. I guess she has had enough. The only communication I have is a text from my wife saying she wants a divorce and that her lawyers will get in touch regarding separation arrangements. I have tried calling, but it keeps going to voicemail, the same as my in-laws. I want to apologize. I want to offer to go to counseling or therapy like she asked. If I still can't get through to her via phone, I am thinking of going to my in-laws' house. I have to try to at least talk to her. I guess my Redditors hate me, but I welcome any suggestions on if there is anything I can try. More updates from the dad. Hi all. I need some advice about how to win back my wife, and I am genuinely willing to do anything. My wife, F29, and I am 34, of 8 years have been having serious relationship issues over the last few years. The main area of friction between us is that I have a son, M16, from a previous teenage fling that I never told her about. We also have another 2 young children together. My 16-year-old had to come live with us about 3 years ago because his biological mother died. His presence in our lives caused a lot of tension between my wife and I because she felt I majorly breached her trust. We argued more and more about minor things until last Thursday I came home to an empty house. I am devastated. My wife is the love of my life and has always been the main support center in my life. I tried calling her, but she kept sending me to voicemail. She sent me a text saying that she wasn't ready to talk but was filing for a divorce and to wait to hear from her lawyers regarding separation mediation. I am a wreck. I would do anything to have her back, including counseling and therapy she had previously asked me to attend, but I was too arrogant to take it up. I felt that if I could just talk to her, I can have a chance to explain and we can get through this. The next day, I did something stupid. I went to her workplace, accounting firm, with her favorite takeaway lunch to try to talk to her. She must have worked up the reception staff because they adamantly refused to buzz me into the office. Her staff even went as far as calling for building security. Not wishing to cause further drama, I left voluntarily. That night, I doubled down on my stupidity. I tried to visit her at her parents' house with a bunch of gifts for her and the kids. My MIL answered through the intercom but wouldn't let me in. I was so frustrated and emotional that I broke down at their door, basically making a scene and refusing to leave. Later, my brother turned up. I assumed my wife called. He tried to convince me to go home, but we ended up in a shouting match. He eventually tried to manhandle me back to my car, so I got into a physical altercation with him, but I left when my father-in-law came out and threatened to call the police on me. Things have really gone downhill since then. This morning, 2 police constables turned up to where I work with a provisional domestic violence order, along with a summons to attend court for a permanent order. I was in shock and, as a result, was inadvertently quite rude to the constables. This put them offside. I am a contractor working at a client site, and so when my client asked the constables what the matter was about, they said they couldn't say for private reasons but then immediately handed out business cards with their Family Violence Liaison Unit title embossed at the top. So now my firm's senior partner has waved me off going back to the client site, and I may be fired. I feel like this is the wake-up call I needed. I know I have been a narcissistic a-hole and am ready to change. What can I do to talk to her to show her I am determined to be better? I don't want to just end it like this. I know that if I have a chance to explain myself, to apologize, to promise to work really hard on my marriage, to work on my narcissism, to go to therapy, to go to counseling, whatever, my wife needs to forgive me and we can get on with our lives. Our court hearing is in a few weeks, so I am thinking of turning up early with some expensive jewelry and try to talk to my wife before the hearing. My solicitor has told me this is a bad idea, but I feel like I need to do something. I don't want to negotiate with my wife across a courtroom. I just want to remind her how much I love her and how much she means to me. What can I do to win my wife back? Has anyone else been in this situation? Update. I get it. It's over. You guys are right. I F up irrevocably this time. I've lost my family and likely will lose my job. I've always tried to control everything in my life. It's worked for me in the past because my family is wealthy and they fix things for me, but my wife and brother must have spoken to my parents because they said I can't use the law firm my family has on retainer for my DVO or upcoming separation proceedings anymore. I'll hire my own solicitor as soon as stuff starts opening. I'll seek mental help too. Most importantly, I'll leave my wife alone. Thanks for your comments and advice. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.